On the Golan Heights, the Israeli forces left to protect the country below were at their absolute minimum, as most of the troops had been sent home for Yom Kippur. When the attack began on the 6th of October 1973 at 2 p.m., the Israeli brigades of some 3,000 troops, 180 tanks and 60 artillery pieces faced 3 Syrian infantry divisions with large armor components comprising 28,000 troops, 800 tanks and 600 artillery pieces. In addition, the Syrians deployed 2 armored divisions from the second day onwards. To fight the opening phase of the battle, before reserves arrived, the Israeli High Command had allocated a single armored brigade, accepting a disparity in tank numbers of 18-1. When the warning by King Hussein of Jordan was conveyed to Israel that a Syrian attack was imminent, Israeli Chief of Staff General Elazar at first only assigned 2 additional tank companies from the 7th Armored Brigade. "We'll have 100 tanks against their 800. That ought to be enough," he said. This typified the arrogance of the IDF left over from the Six-Day War. Eventually his deputy Israel Tal ordered the entire 7th Armored Brigade to be brought up. Efforts had been made to improve the Israeli defensive position. The purple line between Syria and Israel on the Golan ran along a series of low dormant volcanic cones called tells in the north and deep ravines in the south. It was covered by a continuous tank ditch, bunker complexes and dense minefields. Directly west of this line, a series of tank ramps were constructed, earthen platforms on which a Centurion tank could position itself with only its upper turret and gun visible, offering a substantial advantage when dueling the fully exposed enemy tanks. The Syrians began their attack at 1400 hours, exactly the same time that the Egyptians had begun their attack, with an airstrike by about 100 aircraft and a 50-minute artillery barrage. The 2 forward infantry brigades with a tank battalion crossed the ceasefire lines, bypassing the United Nations observer posts. They were covered by mobile anti-aircraft batteries and equipped with bulldozers to fill anti-tank ditches, bridge layer tanks to overcome obstacles, and mine clearance vehicles. These engineering vehicles were priority targets for Israeli tank gunners and took heavy losses. But Syrian infantry demolished the tank ditch, allowing their armor to cross. At 14:45, 200 men from the Syrian 82nd Paratroop Battalion descended on foot from Mount Hermon, and around 1700 hours took the Israeli observation post on the southern slope with its advanced surveillance equipment. A small force dropped by 4 helicopters simultaneously placed itself on the access road south of the base. Specialized Israeli intelligence personnel were captured. Made to believe that Israel had fallen, they disclosed much sensitive information. A first Israeli attempt on October the 8th to retake the base from the south was ambushed and beaten off with heavy losses. Within just a few hours of the attack beginning, Israeli soldiers were forced into an undignified retreat. Syrian forces began pouring down the Golan Heights towards the civilian-populated areas below. For some inexplicable reason, the Syrian forces halted midway down the heights. It is believed that the overriding concern was that they were walking into a trap, as they could not believe that the Israelis had been so easily overwhelmed. This allowed the hastily called up Israeli reserves to reach the front in time to prevent the Syrians cutting off the northern part of the country. There were many heroic events during the battle for the Golan Heights. The most important was that of Avigdor Kahalani and the very few tanks he was left with, when the 7th Division had, to all intents and purposes, been wiped out. His 3 tanks with extraordinarily little ammunition held the Syrians at bay throughout the night of the 6th and the 7th of October, until the relief reserves reached the front. The Syrian tanks had an added important advantage, as they had the most modern Russian night vision infrared equipment, which Israeli tanks did not have. Kahalani and his unit were decorated after the war for their heroics in what became known as the Valley of Tears. Once the reserves had arrived and been organized, the momentum of the war changed significantly, and the Israeli forces retook all the conquered territory, including the base on Mount Hermon, and the road to Damascus was once again opened. But the Israeli forces did not push on to the Syrian capital. The war had far-reaching implications. The Arab world had experienced humiliation in the lopsided rout of the Egyptian-Syrian-Jordanian alliance in the Six-Day War, but felt psychologically vindicated by the early successes in this latest conflict. The Yom Kippur War led Israel to recognize that despite impressive operational and tactical achievements on the battlefield, there was no guarantee that they would always dominate the Arab states militarily, as they had consistently done through the earlier 1948 Arab-Israeli War, the Suez Crisis, and the Six-Day War. These changes paved the way for the subsequent peace process. The 1978 Camp David Accords that followed led to the return of the Sinai to Egypt and normalized relations, the first peaceful recognition of Israel by an Arab country.